The New York Rangers are widely expected to be buyers at this year's trade deadline, but are there any players that could be traded away from the Rangers? Barclay Goodrow, Kaapo Kakko, an important prospect or two, we debate on today's episode.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blueshirts fans, to episode number 1015 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off of your first purchase. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, the Rangers, obviously, the trade deadline is approaching pretty quickly here. Today is, what is today? Wednesday. Rangers going to be back in action Wednesday, February 28th. So the trade deadline at this point, now just 9 days away, if you can actually believe that. But it is a fact. That's how close we are to, the trades obviously stopping at the 3 p.m. deadline on that day. And I think right now, a lot of us widely expecting the Rangers to obviously be buyers. I mean, they have one of the best records in the NHL. They've created some separation in the race for the Metro Division. The last I checked a couple days ago, they actually controlled their own destiny as far as the President's Trophy is concerned. With all that said, though, you never know what can happen, and it is at least possible that certain players on the Ranger roster actually get traded away at or near the trade deadline this season. Again, they will be buyers, and you have to certainly expect the Rangers, after the trade deadline comes and goes, they will have increased their roster or improved their roster, between now and then. But with that said, we have seen a couple of players moved away from the Rangers, even in seasons where they've been buyers. Not, superstar players. Julien Gauthier comes to mind. Semi Blais is another one. Guys that basically have to be traded in order to make room for some other players. And this year, there's been some rumors floating around, everything from like Kaapo Kakko to K'Andre Miller to, maybe Barclay Goodrow, although the Goodrow one feels a little bit more fan-created than actual reports out there. Be that as it may, though, like I said, we're going to leave no stone unturned, look at the Ranger organization right now, and talk about players that are currently here that at least have a chance. A chance doesn't mean it's likely, doesn't mean it's probable or anything like that, but a chance that they may no longer be here once the trade deadline comes and goes 9 days from now. And I'm going to kind of do this. It's not really ranked in any certain order, but we're going to sort of go from least likely to most likely as far as, guys that could be traded at the deadline this season. And I'm going to start this by talking about kind of a 2-for-1 deal here. Two big-time prospects for the New York Rangers. Very likely their two best prospects, Brennan Othmann and Gabe Perreault. Both first-round picks, both very highly thought of. Both have played well at every level of hockey that they've competed in thus far in their hockey careers. And there was a report from Emily Kaplan during a recent national game. I believe it was the game between the Rangers and the Flyers. And it said that, Drury has basically said that when it comes to trade talks for the Rangers, Brennan Othmann, Gabe Perreault, off limits. He's not going to move either one of them. And it's not too hard to see why, because these two, as I just mentioned, off to just spectacular starts and both looking, there's no guarantees. You never know for sure, but both these guys look like they're going to be big-time NHL players. Brennan Othmann has put up just awesome numbers across the board at every level in which he played. We talked about that video game-like season that he had in the OHL a couple of years ago. He's now with the Wolfpack, and he's got 14 goals and 22 assists for 36 points in 45 games with the Pack. There's also the added caveat with Othmann that he is the first draft pick that Chris Drury ever made, at least as the general manager for the Rangers. Of course, he was the assistant GM for a few seasons there, but when you're the assistant GM, the final call is not yours to make. Obviously you have a voice in the room, but Drury, first draft pick as the Ranger GM, Brennan Othmann, and it certainly looks like a good one if what Othmann has done thus far is any indication as far as, what kind of player he's going to be at the NHL level. Of course, he got that quick taste of Ranger hockey earlier this year, and I think, next year and beyond, he's certainly going to become a fixture in this lineup and not somebody that the Rangers will be looking to trade. Gabe Perreault is a freshman at Boston College right now. He now has fallen into second place in college hockey as far as most points are concerned. He's got 50. The only player with more is his teammate, Will Smith. He's got 51. But, Perreault, his skills are just off the charts. It blew everybody's mind, including mine, that he fell all the way to the Rangers as far as he did in the draft last year. And it feels like the steal of the first round, probably the steal of the entire draft. But when you look at, the players that are out there right now, the players that are readily available or would at least seem to be readily available at the trade deadline, guys that are playing for non-contending teams, guys that are on expiring contracts, or all of the above. When you look at the names of players, there's nobody on this list that really stands out to me as like, wow, I would give up Brennan Othmann, or I would give up Gabe Perreault in exchange for one of these players. And to illustrate my point, it's just one ranking here, but this one comes to us from the Hockey Writers. I'm just going to quickly go through their top 10, and I think you guys will probably see what I mean. So the top 10 trade candidates as far as the Hockey Writers are concerned, in order, you've got, and I think they rank this in terms of most likely to least likely to be traded, maybe, or maybe it's in terms of skill that they don't really specify. But top 10 on this list: Noah Hanifin, Chris Tanev, Adam Henrique, Jake Gensel, Vladimir Tarasenko, Jacob Markstrom, Sean Walker, Pavel Buchnevich, Anthony Duclair, and Jake Allen. Now, do any of those players sound like somebody that the Rangers should be giving up? A very young prospect with all the skill and ability and upside in the world for, like a Perreault or like a Brennan Othmann? To me, no. And Jake Gensel, maybe he's the one guy that you look at and say, like, oh, Gensel, he's a big-time player. The Penguins and Rangers are not going to strike a trade that involves Jake Gensel for about 50 different reasons. Just pick one and you can roll with that. But yeah, I mean, to me, I know a lot of people like Tarasenko. They'd like to see him trade back to the Rangers at the deadline. I liked him too. Enjoyed the time that he spent here, not giving up either Othmann or Perreault in exchange for him. And that goes just as true for anybody else on that list that I just mentioned there. So now look, the other possibility here, as far as these two possibly being traded, is that maybe there's somebody out there that we're not even thinking of that isn't or doesn't seem to be readily available as far as the trade market is concerned. Maybe there's a star player, again, that we just don't really know about that actually can be had. And maybe at that point, if there's a true superstar player out there, maybe he's fallen out of favor with his team or whatever the case might be, then maybe the Rangers do actually think about trading Perreault or Othmann. But I don't think they even considering it unless they are presented with an offer where they're bringing in a bona fide superstar player. And from that list that I just read there, I don't think that player actually exists. So they're not going to get traded, barring something completely unforeseen. Another player that I'll throw out there real quickly, and I don't think that it'll happen with him either, but I will mention at least Will Cooley. I don't think Cooley gets traded because he's done everything right. He's already proven to be a very solid, dependable, reliable player, which, those aren't adjectives that you usually hear from 21-year-old rookies, but that's what you're getting from Will Cooley. He goes out there, he plays a physical brand of hockey. He's been part of the third line sort of finding itself recently and really playing some strong hockey. He can get you some points too. I believe he's up to 10 goals on the season. And, Drury didn't draft Will Cooley. He was the assistant GM at the time, but he was in the room. And I don't know, to me, Cooley just seems like a Drury type of player. And it just wouldn't make any sense, to me at least, for the Rangers to trade Will Cooley. The only possible explanation for doing it is that they just don't feel that he has the kind of upside that like a Perreault or Othmann has. But even as I say that, Will Cooley looks like a big time player in the making. He's already a rock solid fixture in this Ranger lineup. And it's looking very possible that his ceiling might be a little bit higher than people might have initially projected. He was a second round pick, but looks like the Rangers got that pick right. And Will Cooley's done a heck of a job. And again, barring something completely unforeseen, he's with this Ranger team past the trade deadline. So like I said, we're going to kind of go through the episode and get to a point where we're going from the least likely to be traded to potentially the most likely to be traded. We're going to continue doing that in just a second. And we're going to talk about specifically Kaapo Kakko. His name has come up every so often as far as trade talks are concerned. So we'll talk about him, a bunch of other players as well. First, though, we definitely would like to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. You should not have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Gametime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices show your total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal before you check out. Buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here. I want to go ahead and just keep talking about, players on the Ranger roster right now that, there's at least a chance that they could be moved out of near the deadline this season. And another player whose name has come up, every so often as we build closer and closer to the trade deadline is Kaapo Kakko. You just say Kaapo Kakko's name right now, and you get instant division among Ranger fans. There's fans that, think that, he didn't have the right coaching his first few years in the league, and he's just been a little bit snake bitten, and he's a good all-around player, and he has played well recently. He has solidified that third line, although it looks like he's going to actually be moving up to the top line with Mika and Kreider for tonight's game against the Jackets. But as far as, him being traded, what I just said goes double. What I just said about Ranger fans being divided on him, it goes double when you talk about his name in any kind of trade discussion. And we got to be fair here. Kakko has struggled at times since he's been drafted by the Rangers. He's dealt with injuries from time to time. He's just been, a mostly inconsistent player. He's also, though, a very good defensive forward. As we mentioned, he's starting to find it offensively a little bit. He's gone 3 straight games without a point, but the 9 games before that, he had 4 goals and 3 assists. So starting to pick it up a little bit, like we were saying. And as far as like a reason why the Rangers could trade Kaapo Kakko, it could be a case if they were to trade him, they might just be feeling like his upside isn't what we thought it once was. He's a solid player, but this is not somebody that's ever going to, reach that absolute top level. That could be the Rangers' way of thinking there. And it's also possible that the Rangers see their salary cap issues. They're so tight against the salary cap right now, and the cap is expected to go up next year. But the Rangers might look at the lay of the land and just think that, there's other guys that are going to need new contracts that we feel are more important to the future of this team than Kaapo Kakko. Alexis Lafreniere comes to mind with the season that he's having. He's under contract for another year after this one. But nevertheless, you look at what he's doing, and the time might be now, actually, to get him extended. But that's a different conversation for a different day. Igor Shesterkin will need a new contract soon. There's some other guys as well. But it's possible that the Rangers, again, they just don't have Kakko too high as far as like guys that, oh man, we can't let this guy get away. We can't let that guy get away. Maybe Kakko has slipped down that list a little bit as far as the Ranger front office is concerned. But as far as why it won't happen and why I don't believe it will happen, he's played better recently. It feels like he's finally starting to find his footing since coming back from injury. We mentioned how he's clicked with, Cooley and Brodzinski recently. And again, they're going to flip-flop Kakko and VZ for tonight's game. It does look that way. Kakko at times kind of fades into the background when he's playing with the star players. So hopefully that's not the case here. Hopefully he goes out there and, really brings it, because, they just keep throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks as far as that top line right wing is concerned. And yes, part of the problem there is that Mika and Kreider have not had their best season when it comes to 5v5 play. I probably saved myself about 20 comments pointing that out to me in the YouTube section there. But, again, Kakko, he's played well overall. I do think he's an important player to this team. And teams just at the trade deadline, they don't tend to subtract, if you're in contention, they don't tend to subtract, significant players. And Kakko is a fairly significant player for this team. On top of that, something we talked about, as soon as Blake Wheeler got hurt, he's out for the season, or it certainly looks that way for Wheeler. And the Rangers were weak at right wing before Wheeler went down. Now, with him being out of the picture, you're going to trade Kaapo Kakko away. Who's left? You could maybe trade Kakko for Vatrano. You could make some kind of a trade package offering that involves Kakko going to Anaheim and Vatrano coming to New York. But again, you're still taking away one of your right wingers. You're bringing in a very good one, but you're taking away a right winger. And I just don't think the Rangers are going to want to do that. Again, it is a position at which they are pretty thin. And once Wheeler got hurt, the chances of Kakko getting traded to me went from small to very small. Never say never. You never know what could be cooking in the front offices right now and what kind of conversation is going on between these GMs. But I don't look for Kaapo Kakko to be on the move at the deadline. Another player that his name came up, a while back, and it hasn't really come up all that often since then. But that player is K'Andre Miller. There was a story that Bleacher Report did, and the story was one player that could be traded away from all 32 teams. And the player they chose for the Rangers was K'Andre Miller. So as far as like this being like a strong rumor, there being smoke to this fire, I don't really see it. And the headline of that article probably gives you an idea as to why I don't see it. Now, it's a fine article. There's a lot of publications that do things like that, and I think they're fun to read. But again, you're looking at all 32 teams and trying to come up with one player from every team that could be traded away. So when you get to the contending teams, I think there's some instances where maybe you're grasping at straws a little bit. And I think K'Andre Miller might be an example of that. Miller occasionally, he'll hear it from Ranger fans every once in a while. But if the Rangers trade Miller, how do you replace him? Like, are you trading Miller for another defenseman who will then replace him in the lineup? Or are you trading Miller for like a center or right winger? And if you do that, then what does your blue line look like? Because K'Andre Miller, you trade him away. Well, now you're down a top four defenseman. I mean, I guess you would probably move Gustafsson up the lineup and have him with Trouba and then put Zac Jones in the lineup on the third pairing. But that doesn't make the Rangers better. I know Miller has had some hiccups every now and then. He's gone through some stretches where he hasn't played all that well. 2 years ago in the playoffs, I thought he was a legitimate superstar in the making, and he has kind of plateaued since then. He hasn't really taken that huge, big-time step forward. But for the most part, K'Andre Miller has been a good player for this team. And like I said, him as much as any other player on this list that we're going to cover today, I just don't see how there's any way that if you're the Rangers, you trade this guy and you come out better for it. Certainly your blue line is not going to come out better for it. That would be very difficult to see unless there's just some off-the-wall crazy trade that's materializing behind the scenes right now where, they go out and get a superstar defenseman and Miller's part of the package for that, but I just don't see it. I mean, I don't see the Rangers forcing, a K'Andre Miller trade. Don't think that it's going to happen. And honestly, kind of reassessing this, I know we said we kind of go in order. I feel like there's even less of a chance that K'Andre Miller will get traded than Kaapo Kakko will get traded. I just don't see other Rangers come out of it a better team if they do decide to move on from K'Andre Miller. So we're going to keep everything rolling just a second. We're going to talk about a couple other prospects that the Rangers might be willing to trade, and two more players from the current NHL roster where there's at least a chance that they could be on the move. We will get to that in just a second. All right. First, we just want to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by our good friends at Sleeper. We are past the halfway point of the season, Ranger fans, and the Rangers are having a heck of a year, basically coast-to-coast leaders in the Metro Division. But regardless of where we are in the current standings, I want to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey. Because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. What players would you take if it was up to you this week while playing Sleeper? Well, I want to let you know that all you have to do is pick whether studs like Panarin or K'Andre Miller or Erik Gustafsson or Jonathan Quick. When to switch up the players a little bit today. We'll record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more in a given game. To win 100 times your bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8-player stats. You heard me, Ranger fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and you will get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. All right, so let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here. Want to shift our attention to a couple more Ranger prospects. Now, these guys aren't quite as far up the totem pole as the aforementioned, Brennan Othmann and Gabe Perreault, but these are guys that are kind of that next tier and guys that I think are a little bit more likely to be dealt by the Rangers as we approach the trade deadline here. It's another 2-for-1 deal, and the two names I'm going to throw out there are both forwards, Brett Berard and Adam Sakura. You could maybe even throw Matthew Robertson in there as well, although it does feel like his star has dropped at least a little bit. But he's somebody that maybe other teams would still be interested in. But the two I really want to focus on, Brett Berard and Adam Sakura. So Berard 21 years old, left winger, former 5th-round pick by the Rangers in 2020. He's only 5'9", 165 pounds, but a very gritty player. He battles, having a nice first season with Hartford in 49 games. He's got 17 goals, 17 assists. And, if he sticks around, if he survives this trade deadline, Brett Berard, I think there's a chance that we see him on the Rangers as soon as this upcoming season. He might be somebody that sort of gets the Brennan, Othmann, Will Cooley treatment from the last couple of years. Of course, Othmann played 3 games with the Rangers this year. Last year, Will Cooley played 4 games with the Rangers, and maybe he gets that kind of a treatment from the Rangers next season. But he's kind of become Berard, that is, a personal favorite of mine when it comes to the Ranger farm system. He just seems to be progressing very nicely. I like the fact that he goes out there and battles on every shift. The little I've gotten a chance to see him play, he does look good. We saw him on a couple of World Juniors teams for the United States, and he won a gold medal there and has looked good, overall, ever since the Rangers drafted him. This might be a late round steal by the Rangers. As far as why he could be dealt, I just feel like he very much fits into the template of a typical Chris Drury trade when the Rangers are buying at the deadline. And what I mean by that is that Drury tends not to trade away players from the current NHL roster. Now, there are exceptions. I mentioned this a little bit earlier in the episode. Somebody like Julien Gauthier, somebody like Sammy Blais, but these are guys that were going to fall out of the lineup anyway, and guys that basically needed to be moved in order to make room for players that were coming in via trade. He doesn't tend to give up, players that are of significant value to the New York Rangers. So if the Rangers aren't going to include a player on the current roster in a trade, then there are other options, but I think the Rangers are also hesitant to trade a first-round pick. I think if possible, they would do everything they could not to, because trading a first-round pick for some of the players that I mentioned earlier in the episode that are available at the deadline, that feels like an overpayment. So, what does that leave you with? And certainly you don't want to trade, Perreault or Othmann. We already covered that. So what does that leave you with? That leaves you with, draft picks that aren't first-rounders, and also prospects currently in your system that are thought of highly, but don't really scream elite NHL player. And I think Berard could be one of those guys. It just kind of feels like if we see the Rangers, if they acquire like an Adam Henrique or a Jordan Eberle, whoever it might be, you might see them part with like a second-round pick and then maybe like a middling prospect, a prospect that they like, but not one that they feel like is going to come in and be like an absolute superstar. And Brett Berard kind of fits the bill there. I think so too does Adam Sikora. Sikora feels like he has a little bit more upside than Berard, partly due to the fact that he was taken in the 2nd round. Berard was taken in the 5th round. And, Sikora was the first player that the Rangers drafted in 2022 because he did not have a first-round pick. But Sikora, a left winger and a center, another undersized forward at 5'11" and 172 pounds. Another reason why they could end up dealing Sikora is he is only 19 years old. You got to figure he's at least a couple of seasons away from playing with the Rangers. And by the time he's really ready to go, and not just debut, but actually, grow into a strong NHL player, the Ranger current core might be getting a little bit older. Certain guys might even be off the team by then. So if you're looking at specifically this window that's open right now, it's possible they feel like Sikora won't get there in time and they could end up trading him, but they're not going to do it just to do it. Adam Sikora, 2nd-round pick, somebody that they really like, a high motor player, somebody that should be a very good NHL player. But again, it's just the fact that if you want to bring in a player that's going to help you at the deadline, you got to give up something. And if the Rangers don't want to give up Othmann and Perreault, which they've said they do not want to do, if they don't want to give up a first-round pick, and if they don't want to give up a player on the current roster, like a Kaapo Kakko, a K'Andre Miller, well, you got to give up something. And, a player like Adam Sikora maybe at that point is in play. I would think they would do everything they could to not do that, but it depends on the return, right? It depends on who the Rangers go out and trade for. But Sikora, first season with the Pack, 45 games, 6 goals, and 13 assists. So not a bad, AHL first season for Sikora. Again, he's only 19 years old and getting close to the half point per game plateau there. So yeah, not too bad from Adam Sikora. So we'll see how that goes. Again, I don't look for him to be traded, but never say never. As far as the Rangers' current NHL roster, we got 2 players left that I want to cover today. Both guys, I think there's a chance they could be traded. And the first one is Barclay Goodrow. And we know about the contract, $3.64 million a season, and he's got 3 more left on his deal after this one. So you say all that, and you also realize that teams aren't exactly going to be knocking down the Ranger door, to acquire Barclay Goodrow. I think the only way that Goodrow gets traded, although this is something that could happen, is that the Rangers strike, a multiplayer, multi-asset deal with this team or with that team. Teams that come to mind are the Ducks. If the Rangers want to go out there and get Vatrano and Henrique, or maybe the Senators. I mean, this one's a little bit off the wall, but I'll throw it out there anyway because some Ranger fans have suggested it. But if they want to do a deal with the Senators where they get like Tarasenko and Chychrun, it's possible Barclay Goodrow is included in those deals. But the thing is, including Barclay Goodrow in either one of those hypothetical deals, that's just going to increase how much more the Rangers are going to have to give up to bring in, say, like Henrique and Vatrano. We'll use that one as an example because I think it's a little bit more realistic. So, if they wanted to go out and make a big-time trade, a big-time splash, get two birds with one stone, and bring in two important players like, again, Vatrano and Henrique, then you'd have to give up, draft picks. You'd have to give up a couple of prospects, I'm sure, as well. And it's possible that if you do all that, maybe the Rangers could sneak Barclay Goodrow into that trade as a way to kind of just dump his contract, basically, not have to worry about paying him any other money, not have to worry about him not allowing the Rangers to bring in players that have high cap hits. As far as like why the Ducks would be interested in Barclay Goodrow, there's no real reason for it. And it's not because Barclay Goodrow is this terrible player that certain Ranger fans would have you believe. He's not, but he is overpaid and that contract is too long. But maybe a young team like the Ducks, a rebuilding team like the Ducks, maybe they would value Barclay Goodrow just for the fact that he is a veteran leader. He's a well-respected player. He's a hard-nosed player, just a no-nonsense kind of guy. Somebody that could go in there and be, a positive influence on some of their young players. But again, Barclay Goodrow, if the Rangers trade him, they're going to have to certainly add a heck of a lot more than just Barclay Goodrow to whatever trade they're trying to get done. They're not going to trade Barclay Goodrow straight up for another player. There is no way that could happen, in fact, because of the contract. That's really what it comes down to. But is it possible that the Rangers strike some kind of a deal? Think about the Blues trade last year, right? They went out and got Tarasenko. They needed him. They wanted their defenseman. They got Mikkola. And there were a whole bunch of other assets. Hunter Skinner was in that trade. Sammy Blais was in that trade. A couple of draft picks. If there's a trade that looks something like that, then once again, it's possible the Rangers could slip Barclay Goodrow into that trade and try to get somebody to take his contract off of their hands. So we'll see how that goes. But I think the number one most likely player in the Ranger organization to get traded at the deadline, probably for the second straight year, because I would have said the same thing last year, and he didn't end up getting traded. But I would say that player is Zac Jones. And with Jones, it's interesting because, the Rangers, we knew they were going to be big players at the deadline last year. And of course, they go out and they get, Kane and Tarasenko, a couple other players as well. But those are the two big name players. And as all these trades are starting to come together, and we see the Rangers are getting Tarasenko, and then we see, the Rangers are getting Kane. When that was all happening, I'm thinking, okay, there's no way that Zac Jones is getting through both these trades without being a part of it. But as it turns out, that's exactly what happened. Zac Jones was still here with the Rangers after the deadline last season. And I would just love to know, was the reason that Jones wasn't traded because, the Blues and the Blackhawks last year just weren't that interested in him? Or did Drury really not want to give him up and he gave other things away, rather than Zac Jones? Was it some combination of those two things? We might never know for sure. But once again, going into the deadline this season, and not that Jones is this superstar player and that he's going to land you, a superstar player in return. But like I said, the framework for a Drury trade seems to be something like a second-round draft pick, maybe a conditional second-round draft pick that can become a first if the Rangers make it to whatever playoff round. You add that, and then you also add a solid player, a guy that is a solid prospect, but maybe doesn't have the upside of some other guys. And Zac Jones, once again, does fit that description. And the other thing with Zac Jones, we've talked about this before, but the Rangers, it's not that Zac Jones can't go out there and give you some good hockey every now and then, because he can. But they just don't really seem to have a need for a player with the skill set of Zac Jones. And what I mean by that is Jones, his best attributes, his best skills, the things that he brings to the table are being an offensive-minded defenseman and a quarterback of the power play. The Rangers really don't need him to do that because they've got a lot of defensemen who are offensive-minded and guys that are more than capable of giving you, quality power play time as well. And that being the case, again, it just kind of feels like a square peg in a round hole, and there just doesn't seem to be all that much of a role for Zac Jones here. He's always the odd man out. He's always kind of the seventh defenseman. So it's possible for that reason that the Rangers would be willing to part with Zac Jones at the deadline. And depending on how active they are and which players they bring in and which teams they're dealing with, and how those teams feel about Zac Jones. Again, I feel like Zac Jones probably the most likely New York Ranger to be traded at the deadline. But I figure we can call it there. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that's @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.